Welcome back to SoulNet, everyone. Today on the pod, we're talking about collective rebirth, something that many of us have been experiencing all across the globe. Now, before we get into the meatiness of today's topic, I thought I'd offer you a little bit of background on some of the language that we're using here on the pod. And one of the terms you'll hear quite often is this collective. One of my favorite ways of kind of explaining this collective consciousness is to think about the ocean as this vast body of water that contains many, many things. And this body of water, as it gets close to the shore, it starts to create these individual waves. And these waves, they rise, they crest, and they fall, returning back to this source of the vastness that is the ocean. So the ocean is the collective consciousness. We are the individual waves. And although having our own individual experiences here, we are all connected to something greater. So without further ado, let's go into the topic of the day, which is this collective rebirth.
Back in the 60s, there was that kind of massive cultural consciousness shift, Age of Aquarius, like really confronting the old paradigm. And maybe for humanity, it's an every 50 to 60 years cycle to confront the old paradigm and do like a volcanic eruption of like new reset, rebirth. Birthing is a traumatic, transformative event. Traumatic and transformative at the same time, empowering and painful at the same time. We're like screaming from pain and screaming from joy at the same time. It's so cataclysmic.
For all the mothers out there, they'll be able to really relate to that. But that goes for anyone who's experienced a major transformative experience, right? A rebirth.
Yeah. And these beautiful cycles of birth, life, and death. It is this constant of our existence here.
And there seem to be bigger shifts every so often, whatever the time frame is, like patterns within the bigger pattern or smaller circles or completing of a loop within a larger context. Yeah,
absolutely. And then we look at maybe how these are pushed to the forefront through our environmental aspects. So a pandemic or any other kind of major things that affect the earth, right?
Exactly.
Well, I feel like with that, Dana, too, right? The pandemic, climate crisis, like what's happening around us, like these things are being brought to the surface. And as human beings, our souls are being like they're crying out. So not just the cry from the earth, but now we're seeing the humans in this discomfort with all of what's happening in the world and with the planet. And now our souls are crying. Like we're joining the cry.
Yeah, the collective cry.
It's a collective cry.
And it's scary for a lot of people without any tools to navigate that. And this is, again, why we come together, right? Share our tools, shares what works for us. And how do we continue to move forward despite the challenges that life throws at us, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally.
And it's like rebirth. Like when there is a collective cry, there must be a paradigm shift. Things must change, right? And so that feels very resonant for me too. Like, I feel like that's where we are right now. Dana, you can speak a little bit to that whole collective rebirth as well, because that's something that you've been really witnessing.
Witnessing for sure. Yeah. I think we are absolutely going most people. There's obviously some that are on a bypass and not on the same journey that we're on. That's the reality. But there is, again, this collective breaking down to break through. Right. This is what we're all doing. Anyone that is paying attention, listening to those little voices of curiosity and whatever that shows up for, even people that aren't really in touch with their intuitive nature, but there's something that causes them to take a different route or apply for a different job or say no to a job or, whatever that might look like. There is a call and it is being answered by so many of us.
I love it. The soul cry is a call.
Yeah.
And It's how we receive the call, what we do with that message coming from deep down, right? How we receive it. What do we do? What kind of changes do we make to honor the soul that's crying out?
Or do we ignore it?
That's
all personal choice, right? And everybody gets to make that decision for themselves, whether it's now or later or ever, right? This is kind of the individual path. That is the microcosm of the macrocosm of the collective path, right?
Yes, yes. So the collective rebirth, really, we all play a part, I guess, in our own rebirth. Is that what we're talking about as well? Like we eat individually, we need to receive that call. Can we speak to that? Maybe helping each other in this space and helping our listeners to understand what that means. There are going to be a lot of people who just ignore that call and just put their head down or bury it in the sand and just believe that the universe will take care of this messiness that we're in. We know that's not the case. We know that we all individually have a little piece of this planet that we occupy and that we are responsible for. How do we heed the call?
That's a really interesting one, because I think we all believe that we are a part of this collective consciousness. But that's not something that everybody out there believes. And this is that waking up. And so the language is really important. It's something I actually struggle with Ayurveda. Sometimes it's like the principles of it as I share it and educate on it are so valuable. But as soon as I talk about consciousness and we are all one, and really if you think about it as this collective being versus the individual, but those individual choices that you make impact the collective, a lot of people kind of eyes glaze over and they're like, it's still woo woo. And although we have a very large and growing spiritual community, there are still others that don't receive that. If we were to use regular language, and Alina might be able to answer this really well too, because as she has a variety of clients that come through, I think playing with language in terms that people understand, becoming aware of ourselves and whatever modalities like help to awaken can be as simple as, like we talked about a little bit of movement, sitting in silence, and also just maybe simplifying into what takes me into constriction and what takes me into expansion. And typically things that make us constrict are things that are those kind of negative aspects of ourselves that are talking, things that lead us like authentically into expansive like feelings of, joy and love, not only for ourselves, but for others, are the direction of the soul and that collective consciousness.
What I notice works when I work with individuals one-on-one, or even in group collectives, because I work with groups as well, is I'll attune myself to what matters to them. So, because everyone is their own little universe. And so if I attune to what is their priorities, then I can speak to them in a language that lands for them. And so then the message that I may be channeling for them, or guidance or feedback or whatever it is, arrives in their language in the way that they receive it. And I could have used my own language, but they may not have received it. So at the end of the day, the words don't matter as much as meeting them where they're at.
With love.
Channeling, with love, which is basically love in that moment looks like attuning to their lens, their locus of experience, their lens, their language, or their body language, or their priorities, their values. And when we do that, we create a win-win, because I'm not going to lose myself. I know why I'm there. I stay tuned into my priorities and values. And if I'm opening the door, even if it's just halfway, in order to meet them in their priorities, then the energy can go back and forth of loving awareness. Because what are we really creating in that moment except just space for them to be able to experience and witness themselves, so they can understand themselves better, so that they can either co-regulate or interact with me or the environment around them.
And your work is so much about that safety, because you do a lot of like deep trauma work of all of us out there. We all do our individual stuff, but Alina's quite heavy. And that's she has a little nickname that we gave her, which is Dr. Doom, because she's all about Dr. Death, all about the deep work.
Yeah, the shadow work, the shadow integration work, right?
Yep.
So that life, death, life cycle. That's really what we're talking about with this collective rebirth. It's almost like certain things in our world have to, like, we're talking about beliefs and language that we've become accustomed to using. the death of those things need to happen so that rebirth,
Mm-hmm.
a new language can arise, that a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at the climate, the health of the planet, the health of our spiritual self. We need to let certain things die off so that these new ideas, these new just ways of seeing and being in the world can be, right? So there's this life, death, life cycle to a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Everything.
Like everything is kind of fleeting. We're moving with it all, right? And if we stay stuck in a language, in a belief that isn't in a relationship, that isn't serving our well-being anymore, it's about really finding the courage and finding the collective, finding your people to help you through that hard space and into this new, more healthy space.
And I think you touched on something really powerful there, because I think the spiritual journey can be really lonely sometimes. We lose, our relationships change, our priorities really change. We feel like we don't fit in. There's a really great science fiction book called Stranger in a Strange Land. And I think many of us on the spiritual path can associate with that. It's like we can be out in the day and we're like, where is everybody? Because a lot of people that are on the path, that don't feel like they're present. And so it can be a very lonely experience. Absolutely.
I feel like it's almost inherently lonely. I think it's one of those rites of passage that in order to have deeply spiritual transformation requires a lone treaded path, which can experience loneliness. Majority of us experience loneliness in that aloneness until we learn that aloneness is not negative. But that's only learned. That's not given to us.
Totally. Well, I think you're right. I think it's really scary for a lot of people, right? It's like what happens when these relationships, these friendships, or these things start to fall away, and you're like, well, who will my tribe be? And this is where we're kind of, I think, extending this big invitation is like, soul curious, you might have found your tribe right here. We're here.
I love the soul curious. It makes me just think of all the bi-curious.
Oh my God,
I mean, we are sexual beings, right? So there's a spectrum.
We are so
there's
curious. I think our curiosity gets tempered from a very young age, and maybe as part of this collective rebirth, we can really tap into our curiosity because it's so healthy and so beautiful.
Yeah.
I just want to say on that note, Eileen, it made me think about the story. It's an old folk story called Vasilisa. And it's about a little girl who's given a doll. Like her mom is dying, her mother is dying, and she gives her a doll. And this doll that she carries is really symbolizes her intuition. So her mother kind of passes on this gift that you always have this intuition with you. Vasilisa ends up in this very negative, destructive home with an evil stepmother and the stepsisters. And Vasilisa is just like this, in her energy is this purity, this caregiving, this loving, and they push her out. They push her out into the dark woods, into the deep, dark night, which is, again, symbolic of when we are pushed out and feel so alone. Yeah. But we have our intuition. And Vasilisa's story is one that I would highly recommend to our listeners to look at, to revisit, throughout your life, because we are all Vasilisa. And whether we received the intuitive gift from our mothers or our fathers, or even our archetypal mothers and fathers, our ancestors, we all have received that gift. And it is in that knowing that you can travel the darkest path. And in the story, she has to confront Baba Yaga, which is like this old witchy, very scary kind of energy force. And Baba Yaga has her doing all these tasks. And it is almost like the soul journey in a story. It's beautiful. It's empowering. It reminds me of what you were saying. And I think that's where we are collectively. Where are we on Vasilisa's journey? Where are you? Where am I? where are we on that journey? Where are we on that path? Have we confronted Baba Yaga, or are we still in the house with the evil stepmother? Where are we in the story?
Well, I feel like that might be a really nice, question to invite our listeners to explore. We're all pretty self-aware and we can share where we're at, but maybe that's a question that our listeners can kind of start to discover is like, where are you on the path? Are you curious? Are you sleeping still? And no judgment, but that's a really good inquiry into the self, is maybe seeing where you might be.
Yeah. Are you still in the house tending to everybody else's needs and not tending to your own?
You can see where the story of Cinderella came from too. And this is very representative of the hero's journey also. And it's the hero's journey of the dark night of the soul before the rebirth, the disillusionment and the alienation and isolation before the rebirth and reconnection.
Ooh, that's a good one too. So Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Some of these stories have so many connections. They were probably inspired by each other in one way or another. But I will return to the hero's journey and look at that as my 2023, maybe the first book I returned to in 2023. Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Eilina. I haven't read that for many years, but we are all on the hero's journey as well.
Yes, we are.
The soul journey. And here we are. So with that, we've got homework. Sisters, we got homework, SoulNet.
Absolutely. So please, any of our audience members, please give us some comments, give us some feedback, share where maybe you are on the path with us. And that can be a jump off point for our conversations for sure.
Yes, I love that. Please share. And if you like what you're hearing and you want more, please like on the podcast too, so that we can continue having these conversations and gathering with all of you here in our SoulNet. Bye for now.